At 0900 hours on April 17, 1944, a subchaser designated USS PC-1264 slipped her moorings at the submarine base in New London, Connecticut. Her crew consisted of 53 enlisted men and 5 officers. 50 of the enlisted personnel were black. This ratio made PC-1264 one of only 2 combat vessels in the United States Navy where African Americans served in technical ratings, operating complex equipment, standing combat watches, and performing duties the Navy's Bureau of Personnel had officially determined they were mentally incapable of handling. The Navy had assembled this crew as an experiment. They wanted to know if black sailors could master the technical demands of modern naval warfare. The unstated assumption beneath this question revealed more than any official memorandum. After 2.5 years of global conflict, with American forces engaged across 2 oceans, the Navy still operated under Jim Crow segregation so complete that it assigned black sailors almost exclusively to the steward's branch, serving food and cleaning officers' quarters. The men aboard PC-1264 would prove whether this policy rested on reality or racism. They would prove it under combat conditions. The vessel herself measured 173 feet, 11 inches from stem to stern. Displacement, 450 tons fully loaded. Maximum speed, 20.2 knots. Though captains who pushed the diesel engines that hard soon faced mechanical failures. The Peace or patrol craft classification denoted submarine chasers, vessels designed to hunt and destroy enemy submarines through a combination of sonar detection and depth charge attack. Standard armament included one 3-inch, 50 caliber dual-purpose gun forward, one 40mm Bofors gun aft, 3 20mm Oerlikon cannons, depth charge projectors, and depth charge racks. The sonar equipment, the QC type, required constant maintenance and skilled operation. The same applied to the engine room, where twin General Motors Cleveland diesel engines each produced 660 horsepower, driving the ship through twin screws. Every system demanded technical competence. Every watch station required training, discipline, and rapid decision-making under stress. The Navy's official position held that black sailors lacked the mental capacity for such work. This position had institutional roots reaching back decades. When the United States entered the First World War in 1917, the Navy accepted black enlistees only for messman positions. Between the wars, this policy solidified into doctrine. By 1940, approximately 4,000 African Americans served in the Navy. All 4,000 worked as messmen. They cleaned, they cooked. The men of the colored race possess limited educational background and lower mental capacity. Assigning them to technical ratings would compromise efficiency and create disciplinary problems. Then the war expanded beyond anything the General Board had anticipated. By late 1942, the Navy faced acute manpower shortages, convoy duty in the Atlantic, amphibious operations across the Pacific, and the massive construction programs launching destroyers, carriers, and battleships by the dozens depleted available personnel. Pressure mounted from multiple directions. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People demanded an end to discriminatory policies. President Roosevelt, conscious of black voters in northern cities, urged the Navy to reconsider. Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox resisted. Admiral Ernest King, Chief of Naval Operations, resisted more forcefully. They would maintain standards. They would not compromise combat effectiveness for political expediency. The compromise they reached satisfied no one, but proceeded anyway. In January 1943, the Navy announced it would accept black recruits for general service ratings, not merely the steward's branch. These men would receive technical training. They would serve aboard ship, but they would serve in segregated units, and their performance would be carefully monitored. The Navy would conduct an experiment to determine if the decades-old assumptions about racial capability held true. 2 patrol craft received predominantly black crews. PC-1264, commissioned at the Latham D. Smith Shipbuilding Company in Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin, on April 25, 1943. Her sister vessel, PC-1264, commissioned weeks earlier. Both ships would operate under white commanding officers. Both would deploy to combat zones. Both would generate reports documenting crew performance in categories including technical proficiency, discipline, and combat effectiveness. The Navy expected these reports to confirm existing policy. Lieutenant Commander Eric Purdon took command of PC-1264, age 33. He had served in the Merchant Marine before receiving his commission. His executive officer, Lieutenant Lloyd Mange, had similar civilian maritime experience. They faced a situation without precedent. They would command a crew the Navy believed incapable of the work assigned. They would train these men on equipment some senior officers thought too complex for them to operate. They would take this vessel into waters where German submarines still hunted Allied shipping, where one mistake, one missed sonar contact, one delayed depth charge pattern could end with their ship on the ocean floor. They would also operate under scrutiny no other subchaser crew endured. Every action report they filed, every inspection their ship underwent, every evaluation of crew performance would be examined not merely for operational efficiency, but as data points in the Navy's racial experiment. Success would open technical ratings to thousands of black sailors currently serving in steward positions. Failure would lock those positions closed for years, perhaps decades. The men knew this. Seaman First Class Reginald Goodwin, assigned to the sonar stack, understood that his proficiency or lack thereof would be interpreted not as individual performance, but as evidence of racial capacity. Torpedo Man's Mate Second Class Samuel Barnes, responsible for depth charge operations, recognized that any error he made would be attributed not to inexperience or stress, but to his race. The weight of representation pressed on every watch, every drill, every moment at sea. Training began at the submarine base in New London. The facility specialized in preparing crews for anti-submarine warfare. Instructors put PC-1264's crew through the standard curriculum, sonar operation, identifying submarine contacts amid the clutter of biological noise, temperature layers, and false echoes. Depth charge loading and setting, handling 300-pound cylinders packed with Torpex explosive, setting the hydrostatic detonators to detonate at specified depths, loading them into racks and projectors under time pressure, engine room procedures, monitoring temperatures, pressures, and fuel consumption across complex diesel systems, responding to damage, maintaining propulsion under attack conditions, damage control, shoring bulkheads, containing flooding, fighting fires, restoring electrical power when systems failed. The instructors had trained hundreds of crews. They had never trained a crew like this. Some came to the work with preconceptions that matched official Navy policy. Black sailors could not handle technical equipment. They lacked discipline. They would require constant supervision. These instructors discovered their assumptions, tested against observable reality. The crew passed every qualification. Sonar operators achieved detection ranges matching or exceeding their white counterparts. Engine room personnel maintained their machinery to specification. Gunnery crews met accuracy standards. Torpedo men handled depth charges with the careful precision the weapons demanded. The instructors could not identify performance deficiencies that correlated with race. What they identified instead were individual variations in ability that appeared in every crew, regardless of composition. By early 1944, PC-1264 had completed training and begun escort duty. She operated primarily in Atlantic coastal waters and the Caribbean, screening convoys against submarine attack. The work involved days of routine patrol, broken by moments of intense action when sonar detected a possible contact. The captain would call the crew to general quarters. Sonar operators would track the contact, calling out bearing and range. Torpedo men would prepare depth charges. The ship would make her run, launching the 300-pound cylinders in precise patterns designed to bracket and destroy the target. German submarine operations in American coastal waters had declined by 1944, but attacks still occurred. Convoy escort remained dangerous work. It also remained work that generated measurable performance data. How quickly did the crew respond to sonar contacts? How accurately did they prosecute attacks? How well did they maintain their equipment? These metrics accumulated in reports that moved up the chain of command to Bureau of Personnel analysts studying the experiment. The data contradicted official assumptions. On May 4, 1944, PC-1264 detected a submarine contact at range 3,000 yards while screening a convoy off Cape Hatteras. Lieutenant Commander Purdon ordered general quarters at 1345 hours. The sonar operators, working in the cramped space of the sonar shack, tracked the contact as it maneuvered. Range decreased to 1,800 yards, then 1,200. The contact showed characteristics consistent with a submarine attempting to position for torpedo attack on the convoy. Purdon brought his ship to attack course. At 900 yards, he ordered, "Commence attack." The torpedo men launched the first pattern. 5 depth charges set to detonate at 100, 150, and 200 feet. The charges rolled off the stern racks and arced from the K-gun projectors mounted amidships. PC-1264's wake turned white as the charges sank into the dark water below. 5 columns of white water erupted as the Torpex detonated. The pressure waves propagated through the ocean, sufficient to crush a submarine's hull if the pattern achieved proximity. Sonar reported no breakup noises, no debris. The contact had evaded or withstood the attack. Purdon ordered a second run. Again, the depth charges launched. Again, the ocean erupted. This time, sonar detected unusual noises. Metallic groaning that might indicate hull damage. The contact faded from sonar. Oil appeared on the surface, a dark slick spreading in the ship's wake. PC-1264 circled the area for 2 hours, searching for additional evidence of a kill. They recovered metal fragments and wooden debris. The evidence suggested damage, but not definitive destruction. Purdon filed his action report, noting 1 probable submarine damaged. The Navy's assessment board later classified the action as possible damage. Insufficient evidence for a confirmed kill. The classification mattered less than the performance. Every crew member had executed their duties under combat pressure. The sonar operators had maintained contact through the target's evasive maneuvers. The torpedo men had loaded and launched depth charges at the precise moments required. The engine room had provided full power for rapid maneuvering. The gun crews had stood ready to engage should the submarine surface. The ship had performed as trained, and the crew had performed as trained. And none of the Navy's assumptions about racial limitations had manifested in the action. Similar patterns continued through the summer and fall of 1944. PC-1264 escorted convoys, conducted anti-submarine patrols, and stood into ports from New York to Trinidad. Her crew became more proficient with experience. Maintenance inspections found the ship well maintained. Action reports documented proper procedures followed under pressure. The Navy's experiment accumulated data, and the data consistently contradicted the premises that had justified segregation. The Navy had institutional inertia, decades of practice and belief supporting existing structures. Senior officers who had spent entire careers in the segregated service saw integration as a threat to discipline and efficiency. They interpreted the PC-1264 data not as evidence demanding policy revision, but as anomalies, special cases that did not override general principles. What eventually broke this resistance was not a single dramatic incident, but the grinding pressure of wartime necessity, combined with undeniable evidence from multiple sources. PC-1264 was not the only success story. Black sailors at shore installations performed technical work at levels matching their white counterparts. The Marine Corps, traditionally resistant to integration, began training black infantry units and discovered they fought effectively. The Army, though still segregated, had black artillery battalions, tank destroyer battalions, and combat engineers performing at high levels in Europe. The weight of evidence became impossible to ignore. More importantly, the war's manpower demands made segregation increasingly impractical. Every black sailor assigned to the steward's branch represented a man who could be trained for technical ratings if the Navy would accept him. Every convoy that needed escort, every amphibious operation that required support, every new vessel that needed crew, created pressure to utilize all available personnel without arbitrary restrictions. In February 1945, the Navy issued new guidance. Black sailors would be accepted for all ratings and all duties. Assignment would be based on qualification, not race. Ships would integrate their crews. The change came as a directive, not a debate. The evidence had accumulated past the point where resistance could be sustained. PC-1264 continued operations through the end of the war. She survived without loss, though her crew experienced near misses. On June 14, 1945, she was screening a convoy off Delaware when a contact appeared at maximum sonar range. General quarters sounded at 0430 hours. The contact closed rapidly, too rapidly for a submarine. It was more likely a whale or a temperature layer creating a false echo, but Purdon could not afford to assume. He brought the ship to intercept course. At 1,800 yards, the contact turned. Sonar reported propeller noises, definite mechanical signature. This was a submarine. Purdon ordered attack. The depth charges launched into the pre-dawn darkness. The ocean heaved upward in white columns, illuminated by the ship's running lights. Sonar reported metallic noises, then silence. The contact had disappeared. They searched until daylight. They found nothing. No oil, no debris, no evidence. The contact might have been a submarine that escaped. It might have been a friendly submarine on exercises, though no notifications had come through. It might have been sonar anomalies combined with biological noise producing a phantom target. The action report noted contact, acquired and attacked. Results, indeterminate. These ambiguities characterize submarine warfare. Sonar technology in 1945 could detect contacts at ranges measured in thousands of yards, but it could not always distinguish submarine from whale, enemy from friendly, real from false. Crews made decisions based on incomplete information, launching attacks that might destroy enemy vessels or might expend depth charges against empty ocean. The men aboard PC-1264 made these decisions using the same equipment and the same training as every other subchaser crew. They achieved the same uncertain results, which itself demonstrated equality of capability. When Japan surrendered in August 1945, PC-1264 was operating in the Caribbean. Her crew received the news at sea. They had served 28 months on active duty. They had conducted hundreds of patrols. They had prosecuted multiple anti-submarine attacks. They had proven capable of every task assigned. The Navy's experiment had produced definitive results. The institutional response took years to fully develop. Issuing a directive ending segregation and actually implementing integration across thousands of ships and installations were different challenges. Resistance persisted in some commands. Old attitudes did not vanish because policy changed, but the direction had been established. And PC-1264 had provided critical evidence supporting that change. Lieutenant Commander Purdon wrote a final fitness report on his crew in November 1945. As the ship prepared for deactivation, he assessed technical proficiency as excellent across all ratings. He noted discipline as meeting or exceeding standards. He evaluated combat performance as fully satisfactory. These assessments entered personnel files that would follow the crew members into civilian life. Documentation of service and capability. The ship herself decommissioned at the Philadelphia Navy Yard on February 7, 1946. The Navy sold her for scrap in 1947. She had lasted 4 years from commissioning to scrapping, a brief existence even for a wartime vessel. Her material legacy amounted to 360 tons of steel returned to commercial use. Her historical legacy proved more substantial. The men who served aboard PC-1264 dispersed to civilian life, carrying their discharge papers and their experiences. Seaman First Class Reginald Goodwin, the sonar operator, used his GI Bill benefits to attend college. He became an electrical engineer. Torpedo Man's Mate Second Class Samuel Barnes returned to Georgia and opened a garage, applying mechanical skills developed in the Navy to civilian employment. Others pursued different paths, but they shared the knowledge that they had performed technical military duties competently under combat conditions, despite official Navy doctrine declaring them incapable of such work. They also shared an understanding of what their service had cost. The pressure of representation, the knowledge that their individual performance would be interpreted as evidence of racial capacity, had created stress beyond normal combat strain. They could not simply be sailors doing their jobs. They had to be proof, demonstration, vindication, Every mistake risked confirming prejudice. Every success risked dismissal as an anomaly. The psychological burden of this position went unacknowledged in official reports that focused on measurable performance metrics. But the metrics themselves told a clear story. Black sailors trained on complex equipment operated that equipment competently. Black sailors assigned to technical ratings performed those ratings satisfactorily. Black sailors serving in combat situations responded appropriately under pressure. These facts, documented across multiple vessels and installations, made the Navy's segregation policy unsustainable. The integration process that followed was neither smooth nor complete. The Navy issued orders, but changing institutional culture required more than directives. Black sailors continued to face discrimination, both subtle and overt, throughout the late 1940s and 1950s. Assignments to certain schools or certain vessels remained difficult to obtain. Promotions came slower for black personnel than white personnel, with equivalent qualifications. The formal barriers had fallen, but informal barriers persisted. What had changed was the official justification. After PC 1264 and vessels like her, the Navy could no longer claim that black sailors lacked the mental capacity for technical work. The evidence contradicted this claim too thoroughly. The institution had to abandon its stated rationale for segregation. And without that rationale, maintaining segregation became increasingly difficult to defend. This represented progress, though limited progress. The men aboard PC 1264 had proven capable, but they had been required to prove capability in ways white sailors never faced. No white crew ever commissioned with the explicit purpose of demonstrating that white personnel could handle technical ratings. No white captain ever filed reports knowing they would be analyzed as evidence of racial capacity. The asymmetry persisted even as the formal policies changed. Historians examining this period often emphasize the courage required of black military personnel who served in segregated units. This courage was real and significant, but focusing solely on courage risks obscuring the institutional injustice that created situations requiring such courage. The men aboard PC 1264 should not have needed courage to operate sonar equipment or launch depth charges. These were technical tasks, not moral tests. They required training and competence, qualities distributed without regard to race. That the Navy forced black sailors to prove this obvious fact under combat conditions represented a failure of the institution, not a validation of the system. The validation came in the subsequent changes. By 1948, President Truman issued Executive Order 9981, mandating equality of treatment and opportunity in the armed forces. The order applied to all services, but the Navy's experience with vessels like PC 1264 had provided evidence supporting the order's feasibility. Integration could work because it had worked, in specific cases, under specific conditions that had been carefully documented. The documentation itself reveals the period's assumptions. Action reports from PC 1264 contain language absent from reports on other subchasers. Commanders noted the crew's race when describing performance, making explicit what would have remained implicit for white crews. Inspectors evaluated the vessel with particular attention to crew discipline and morale, looking for problems that assumptions suggested must exist. These reports, even when concluding positively, demonstrated how thoroughly racial prejudice had penetrated institutional thinking. Reading these documents decades later produces a strange cognitive dissonance. The reports describe ordinary naval operations, standard procedures, but they describe them with an undercurrent of surprise, as if competent performance by black sailors constituted an unexpected outcome worthy of special mention. This surprise, carefully modulated in official language, revealed more about the observers than the observed. The men observed understood this dynamic. They recognized that their service would be scrutinized, analyzed, and used as evidence in debates about racial policy. Some embraced this role, viewing their performance as contribution to civil rights progress. Others resented the burden, wanting simply to serve without carrying representative weight. Both perspectives were valid. Both reflected the complicated position of black military personnel operating within institutions that simultaneously needed and distrusted them. PC-1264 operated for 28 months. In that time, she steamed approximately 60,000 nautical miles, screened hundreds of merchant vessels, and conducted dozens of anti-submarine patrols. Her crew performed every duty assigned. They maintained their equipment. They responded to emergencies. They stood watch in all weather conditions. They did the work. That this work required special documentation, special scrutiny, and special reporting reflected a system that had elevated racial prejudice to policy level. The Navy had institutionalized assumptions about black inferiority so thoroughly that contradictory evidence required multiple data points across multiple vessels over multiple years to even begin shifting official positions. One successful patrol was not sufficient. One successful deployment was not sufficient. The evidence had to accumulate until denying it became impossible. This accumulation took time, and during that time, men served under policies they knew were unjust. They operated equipment they had been told they could not master. They performed duties they had been told exceeded their capabilities. They did this while knowing that failure would confirm prejudice, but success might be dismissed as anomalous. The psychological complexity of this position deserves recognition. So does the achievement. By every measurable standard, PC-1264's crew succeeded. They met technical qualifications. They maintained discipline. They performed under combat conditions. They proved capability the Navy had denied they possessed. The ordinary nature of their achievement was itself significant. Black sailors did not need to be extraordinary to justify integration. They simply needed to be competent, which they were. The baseline for service was technical proficiency and reliable performance, not superhuman ability. PC-1264's crew met the baseline. That the Navy had ever questioned whether they could do so represented institutional failure, not their limitation. After the war ended, some of PC-1264's crew remained in the Navy. They served in the integrated service that their wartime performance had helped create. Others left for civilian careers. They carried their discharge papers marked honorable. Documentation of service satisfactorily completed. These papers opened certain opportunities, while other opportunities remained closed by civilian discrimination that military integration could not affect. The progress was real, but incomplete. The Navy had abandoned official segregation, but American society retained it in housing, employment, education, and countless informal practices. Black veterans returned from war to find that military service had proven their capability, but not secured their equality. This bitter irony characterized the immediate post-war period for black service members across all branches. Yet the changes mattered. The Navy's integration provided a model, however imperfect, for institutional reform. It demonstrated that integration could proceed without the disciplinary collapse or efficiency loss that critics predicted. It showed that white and black personnel could serve together effectively when institutions supported rather than hindered cooperation. These lessons would prove relevant to broader civil rights struggles in subsequent decades. PC-1264 herself disappeared into scrap metal, her steel recycled in the post-war production. No museum preserves her. The Navy's historical records contain her action reports and commissioning documents, materials accessible to researchers but unknown to most Americans. Her physical existence ended in 1947. Her historical significance persists. She represented a turning point, one data point among many, but a critical one, in the long struggle to integrate American military services. The men who served aboard her proved that racial prejudice, however thoroughly institutionalized, could be contradicted by evidence and undermined by demonstrated competence. They did this under pressure, under scrutiny, and under conditions that white sailors never faced. They did the work. They proved capable. The Navy eventually acknowledged this capability and changed its policies accordingly. This sequence represents neither inevitable progress nor dramatic transformation, but rather the grinding process by which unjust systems sometimes yield to persistent evidence and sustained pressure. Today, the United States Navy operates without racial segregation. Black sailors serve in all ratings, all specialties, all ranks. They command vessels, lead air wings, and hold positions at every level of the service. This integration, now taken for granted, required decades of struggle. PC-1264 contributed to that struggle through 28 months of competent service that contradicted official doctrine. The men who served aboard her deserve recognition, not for extraordinary heroism, but for ordinary excellence under extraordinary pressure. They operated sonar equipment, maintained diesel engines, loaded depth charges, and stood watches. They performed technical work the Navy had declared them incapable of performing. They did this work well enough to help change institutional policy. Their achievement was proving the obvious, that race did not determine capability, that black sailors could master the same equipment and perform the same duties as white sailors, that this obvious truth required proof under combat conditions represents a dark chapter in American military history. That the proof succeeded represents a critical moment in the long arc toward equality. PC-1264, commissioned in April 1943 and decommissioned in February 1946. She existed for less than 3 years. She influenced policy that would shape American military service for decades. Her crew numbered 53 enlisted men and 5 officers. They changed an institution that had resisted change for generations. Competently and consistently, under conditions designed to test whether they deserved jobs they should never have been denied. The injustice of this test does not diminish the significance of their success. If anything, it amplifies it. They succeeded not merely in operating a patrol craft, but in forcing an institution to confront evidence it had tried to ignore. The evidence accumulated. The policies changed. The Navy integrated. These outcomes emerged from multiple sources and multiple pressures, but PC-1264 contributed to each. Her story deserves preservation, not as inspiration, but as documentation. Record of what happened when the Navy's racial assumptions met reality and reality prevailed. That reality was simple: competent people, properly trained, could perform competently regardless of race. PC-1264 proved this proposition through 28 months of patrols, attacks, escorts, and watches. The men aboard her knew they were being tested. They knew the test was unjust. They passed it anyway. Their service opened opportunities for thousands of black sailors who followed. It demonstrated that integration could work in military contexts where cohesion and discipline were critical. It provided evidence used to justify broader policy changes. These contributions matter. So does the cost. The men aboard PC-1264 served under pressure white sailors never experienced. They carried representative weight that turned individual performance into racial evidence. They succeeded, but success came at psychological cost that official reports never measured. Understanding their story requires acknowledging both achievement and injustice. They proved capable, which mattered. They should never have needed to prove capability, which also mattered. Both truths coexist in the historical record, neither negating the other. PC-1264 steamed 60,000 nautical miles, proving what should have been assumed. Her crew operated complex equipment, proving they could learn. They maintained discipline, proving they could adapt. They performed under combat pressure, proving they could serve. The Navy learned from this evidence, slowly, reluctantly, against institutional resistance. It changed. Integration proceeded. Opportunities expanded. Black sailors gained access to ratings and positions previously denied them. This progress emerged from the service of men who should not have needed to prove themselves but did so anyway. Their achievement was forcing change through competent performance. Their legacy is a more just institution, though one still carrying scars from its segregated past. USS PC-1264. Decommissioned 79 years ago, her crew dispersed into civilian life, carrying memories of service under unique pressure. Some spoke about their experiences, others did not. All understood that they had participated in something larger than routine patrol duty. They had challenged institutional racism through the simple act of competent service. They had proven capability the Navy denied they possessed. They had helped integrate an institution that had resisted integration for generations. They did this by doing their job, day after day, patrol after patrol, watch after watch. Competence. and persistence in the face of institutional prejudice. The Navy eventually acknowledged what they proved, that black sailors could serve capably in all ratings. This acknowledgement came slowly, but it came. PC-1264's service contributed to that outcome. Her story deserves remembering, not for drama, but for significance. A small vessel with a tested crew helped change American military policy. The change came through evidence accumulated under combat conditions. The evidence contradicted decades of institutional assumption. The men who served aboard PC-1264 created that evidence. They served their country, while their country questioned their capacity to serve. They proved that capacity through performance measured in patrols completed, equipment maintained, watches stood. This was their contribution. This was their legacy. This is their story, documented in action reports and fitness evaluations and policy changes that followed from demonstrated competence under pressure. USS PC-1264, Patrol Craft. Experiment. Proof. Catalyst for change. 173 feet of steel, and evidence that helped integrate the United States Navy.